Father Thomas had been standing at the altar of Holy Cross Church for over 20 years. He had seen it all: nervous grooms who forgot their vows, brides who tripped on their dresses, and even a few runaway brides who changed their minds at the last second. But today felt different somehow. Maybe it was the perfect spring weather outside, or maybe it was just another ordinary Saturday wedding that would blend into his memory with all the others. The church looked absolutely stunning. White roses and baby's breath decorated every corner, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Soft sunlight streamed through the colorful stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. The smell of fresh flowers mixed with the familiar scent of old wood and candle wax that made this place feel so sacred and peaceful. About 200 guests filled the church that morning. Family members chatted quietly in their best clothes, while friends took pictures and whispered excitedly about the ceremony. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to be there. You could feel the joy and anticipation in the air, like electricity before a storm. The groom's family sat on the right side, mostly well-dressed business types who looked like they had money. The bride's side was a mix of different people, some fancy, some simple, but all wearing warm smiles. Father Thomas watched as David stood at the front, adjusting his expensive black tuxedo for the 10th time. The 29-year-old architect looked every bit the successful young man. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his smile never seemed to fade. He kept checking his gold watch and smoothing down his tie, clearly excited but trying to appear calm and collected. The organ music started and everyone turned toward the back of the church. This was always Father Thomas's favorite moment, seeing the bride walk down the aisle while her loved ones watched with tears of joy in their eyes. Today would be no different, or so he thought. Lisa appeared at the church entrance, and several guests actually gasped at how beautiful she looked. At 26, she was stunning in her grandmother's vintage wedding dress. The cream-colored lace had been carefully restored, and it fit her perfectly. Her long brown hair was swept up in an elegant style, with small white flowers tucked behind her ear. She carried a bouquet of white roses that matched the church decorations perfectly. But as she began her slow walk down the aisle, Father Thomas noticed something that made him pause. Her smile looked a little too bright, almost forced. Her eyes darted around nervously, never quite meeting anyone's gaze for more than a second. Most brides were nervous, sure, but this seemed different somehow. Lisa's father, a kind-looking man in his 50s, held her arm gently as they walked. He kept whispering things to her, probably words of encouragement, but she barely seemed to hear him. Her grip on his arm appeared unusually tight, like she was holding on for dear life rather than simply walking down the aisle. The wedding march played beautifully, but Father Thomas found himself studying the bride more carefully than usual. Something about her body language bothered him, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly what it was. She moved stiffly, almost robotically, like she was forcing herself through the motions rather than floating on cloud 9 like most brides. When Lisa reached the altar, her father kissed her cheek and placed her hand in David's. The groom's smile grew even wider, and he squeezed her hand tight, maybe a little too tight. Lisa's smile flickered for just a moment, so briefly that most people probably missed it. But Father Thomas had been watching closely, and he definitely noticed. As the couple faced each other at the altar, Father Thomas began the ceremony with his usual warm greeting to the congregation. Everyone settled into their seats, cameras ready, tissues prepared for the emotional moments that were sure to come. The atmosphere was perfect: loving families, beautiful decorations, and what appeared to be a couple deeply in love. David gazed at Lisa with what looked like complete adoration. He mouthed, "I love you," and winked at her playfully. She smiled back, but Father Thomas noticed that her hands were shaking slightly. Wedding nerves, he told himself. Perfectly normal for such a big day. The priest began reading the traditional words about marriage being a sacred bond between two people who choose to share their lives together. The congregation listened quietly, some wiping away happy tears as they remembered their own wedding days. Everything was going exactly as planned. But something kept nagging at Father Thomas. Maybe it was his years of experience dealing with people in crisis, or maybe it was just intuition, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The bride's nervousness seemed deeper than normal wedding jitters. Her breathing appeared shallow and quick, like someone trying not to panic. He continued with the ceremony, asking the couple to join hands for the exchange of vows. As David reached for Lisa's hands, Father Thomas saw her flinch slightly, barely noticeable but definitely there. When their hands touched, she seemed to tense up rather than relax into the moment. The wedding photographer moved around quietly, capturing every angle of what appeared to be a perfect ceremony. Guests smiled and nodded approvingly as the couple stood together looking like a fairy tale come to life. On the surface, everything looked absolutely wonderful. But Father Thomas had learned to look beyond the surface during his many years as a priest. People came to him with all kinds of problems, and he had developed a sixth sense about when something was wrong. Right now, every instinct he had was telling him to pay closer attention to this bride who seemed more frightened than happy on what should have been the best day of her life. As he prepared to ask the traditional questions about taking each other as husband and wife, Father Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He was going to trust his instincts and watch this young woman very carefully. Something told him that her life might depend on it. Father Thomas continued with the ceremony, but his attention kept drifting back to Lisa's face. Something was definitely off, and it was bothering him more with each passing minute. He had performed this same ceremony hundreds of times, and he knew what genuine happiness looked like. This wasn't it. As he began reading the traditional vows, he watched Lisa's reaction carefully. Most brides got emotional during this part. Tears of joy, big smiles, sometimes even little laughs when they got overwhelmed with happiness. But Lisa just stood there, perfectly still, like a statue. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, not really, looking at David or Father Thomas or anyone else. It was like she was somewhere else entirely. David, on the other hand, seemed completely caught up in the moment. He was grinning from ear to ear, nodding along with every word the priest spoke. His eyes never left Lisa's face, and he kept squeezing her hands gently. To everyone watching, he probably looked like the perfect, loving groom. But Father Thomas noticed that every time David squeezed her hands, Lisa's jaw tightened just a little bit. When it came time for the couple to repeat their vows, David spoke his words clearly and confidently. His voice carried across the entire church, full of emotion and conviction. Several guests wiped their eyes during his heartfelt promises to love and cherish Lisa forever. It was exactly what everyone wanted to hear at a wedding. Then it was Lisa's turn. Father Thomas waited for her to begin, but she hesitated. The pause was long enough that some guests started shifting uncomfortably in their seats. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Father Thomas had to lean closer just to hear her properly. Her words came out flat and mechanical, like she was reading from a script rather than speaking from her heart. That's when Father Thomas noticed something that made his blood run cold. As Lisa lifted her hand to brush a strand of hair away from her face, her sleeve pulled back slightly. There, around her wrist, were what looked like finger marks, faint purple bruises in the shape of someone's grip. They were partially hidden by makeup, but under the church's bright lights they were clearly visible to anyone who knew what to look for. The priest had seen those kinds of marks before. During his 20 years of service, he had counseled enough troubled marriages to recognize the signs. His heart started beating faster as he realized what he might be witnessing. But he couldn't just stop the ceremony based on suspicion alone. He needed to be absolutely sure. He continued with the next part of the service, but now he was studying every detail of Lisa's appearance and behavior. Her makeup was flawless, almost too perfect for a morning wedding. It was the kind of heavy, professional makeup that could easily hide imperfections, or in this case, bruises. Around her left eye, the foundation looked slightly thicker than the rest of her face. Lisa's dress choice also started making more sense. The vintage gown had long sleeves and a high neckline, covering almost every inch of her skin except her face and hands. Most spring brides chose something lighter and more revealing, especially for an outdoor reception that was planned for later that day. but this dress covered everything that might need hiding. Father Thomas watched as David reached out to adjust Lisa's veil, a seemingly sweet gesture that made several guests smile. But Lisa flinched when his hand came near her face, a quick, automatic reaction that she tried to cover up immediately. It was the kind of flinch that came from experience, from someone who had learned to expect pain when hands moved too quickly in their direction. The ceremony continued, but Father Thomas felt like he was watching everything through a different lens now. David's loving touches looked more possessive than affectionate. His constant smiling seemed forced and controlling rather than joyful, and Lisa's quiet compliance appeared more like fearful submission than bridal nerves. During the ring exchange, Father Thomas got his closest look yet at the couple. As they turned to face each other, he could see Lisa's face in profile. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, like someone trying very hard not to panic. A thin layer of sweat had formed on her forehead despite the cool temperature in the church when David slipped the wedding ring onto her finger. His grip was firm and deliberate. Lisa's hand trembled in his, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked. Father Thomas saw pure terror flash across her face before she quickly forced the smile back into place. The congregation was completely unaware of the drama unfolding at the altar. They saw a beautiful wedding between two young people who appeared to be deeply in love. The photographer continued snapping pictures, the organist played softly in the background, and guests watched with happy tears in their eyes. Nobody else seemed to notice that the bride looked more like a prisoner than a woman celebrating the happiest day of her life. Father Thomas felt a heavy weight settling in his chest. His years of training and experience were screaming at him that something was terribly wrong here. But stopping a wedding ceremony was no small matter. Families had spent thousands of dollars. Guests had traveled from far away, and the legal paperwork was already in motion. If he was wrong about his suspicions, he would be ruining what should be one of the most important days in these young people's lives. But if he was right, and he did nothing, he might be condemning Lisa to a life of abuse or worse. The thought of staying silent while someone suffered made him feel sick to his stomach. He had taken an oath to protect and serve his community, and that included protecting vulnerable people from harm. As he prepared to ask the final questions that would legally bind Lisa and David as husband and wife, Father Thomas made a decision that would require enormous courage. He was going to trust his instincts and take action, even if it meant facing the anger and confusion of everyone in that church. Some things were more important than following tradition, and saving someone's life was definitely one of them. Father Thomas reached the most important moment of the ceremony. His hands gripped the prayer book tightly as he prepared to ask the final questions that would make Lisa and David husband and wife. The church was completely silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the occasional whisper from excited guests. He looked at Lisa one more time, hoping to see something that would ease his growing concern. Instead, what he saw made his decision for him. Her face had gone completely pale, and tiny beads of sweat were forming along her hairline despite the cool temperature in the church. She was breathing in short, quick gasps like someone having a panic attack. This wasn't wedding nerves. This was pure terror. Father Thomas took a deep breath and made a choice that went against every rule in the book. In 20 years of performing wedding ceremonies, he had never done what he was about to do. But sometimes, being right was more important than following tradition. Before we continue with these sacred vows, he announced in a clear, steady voice that carried throughout the entire church, I need to speak with the bride privately for just a moment. The effect was immediate and dramatic. A wave of confused murmurs swept through the congregation like wildfire. Guests turned to each other with puzzled expressions, wondering what could possibly be wrong. Some people half rose from their seats, craning their necks to get a better view of what was happening at the altar. David's reaction was the most telling of all. His perfect smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of cold anger that sent chills down Father Thomas's spine. His voice was sharp and demanding when he spoke. What's going on here? This is highly unusual, Father. We're in the middle of our wedding ceremony. I understand this is unexpected, Father Thomas replied calmly, though his heart was pounding in his chest. but sometimes we need to make sure everything is as it should be before we proceed with such an important commitment. Lisa looked like she might faint. Her bouquet was shaking so badly in her hands that several flower petals fell to the floor. She kept glancing back and forth between Father Thomas and David like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. David stepped closer to Lisa and put his arm around her waist in what looked like a protective gesture to the watching guests. But Father Thomas saw the way Lisa tensed up when David touched her, and he noticed how tightly David was gripping her side. "There's really no need for this," David continued, his voice getting louder and more agitated. "Lisa is perfectly fine. Aren't you, honey?" He looked down at her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lisa opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just nodded weakly, but her eyes were screaming something completely different. Father Thomas knew he had reached the point of no return. The entire congregation was watching. David was getting angrier by the second, and Lisa looked like she was about to collapse. But he also knew that if he backed down now, he might never forgive himself for what could happen to this young woman. "Lisa," he said gently, speaking directly to her and ignoring David completely, "I would like you to come with me to the side room for just a few minutes. We need to have a private conversation." "She doesn't need to go anywhere," David interrupted, his voice now carrying a threatening edge that several guests near the front definitely noticed. "Whatever you need to say can be said right here." But Father Thomas had spent years dealing with difficult situations, and he wasn't going to be intimidated. He stepped around David and extended his hand toward Lisa. "My dear, this will only take a moment. Please come with me." Lisa looked at David with an expression of absolute terror. He was staring at her with eyes that promised serious consequences if she moved. The silent battle of wills playing out at the altar was becoming obvious to more and more people in the congregation. Finally, Lisa made a choice that probably took every ounce of courage she had. She let her bouquet fall to the floor and took Father Thomas's outstretched hand. The sound of the flowers hitting the marble floor seemed incredibly loud in the tense silence. David's mask slipped completely for just a moment, and his true nature showed through. His face twisted with rage, and he grabbed Lisa's other arm hard enough to make her gasp in pain. "She's not going anywhere," he hissed through gritted teeth. That was all Father Thomas needed to see. He gently but firmly removed David's hand from Lisa's arm and positioned himself between the couple. "The bride is coming with me," he stated with quiet authority. "This is God's house, and I am in charge of what happens here." The tension in the church was thick enough to cut with a knife. Some guests were starting to whisper more loudly, sensing that something serious was happening. Others were pulling out their phones, though. Whether to call for help or record the drama was unclear. Lisa's mother stood up in the front pew, her face full of confusion and growing concern. "What's happening? Is Lisa okay?" David quickly switched back to his charming, public persona, flashing his perfect smile toward the congregation. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Patterson. Just a little pre-ceremony consultation, perfectly normal." But Father Thomas wasn't buying it anymore, and he could tell that some of the guests were beginning to see through David's act as well. The way he had grabbed Lisa's arm and the way she had reacted spoke volumes to anyone who was paying attention. "Lisa," Father Thomas said softly, "you have a choice here. You can come with me and we can talk privately, or we can continue with the ceremony. But I want you to know that whatever you decide, you are safe in this church." Those last words seemed to break something inside Lisa. Tears started flowing down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup and revealing the faded bruise around her left eye that the foundation had been hiding. For the first time all morning, she looked directly at Father Thomas and nodded. Without another word, she walked toward the side door that led to the small consultation room behind the altar. Father Thomas followed her, leaving David standing alone at the altar facing a congregation full of confused and increasingly concerned wedding guests. As they disappeared through the doorway, David's angry voice could be heard demanding that they return immediately. But Father Thomas had made his choice, and he was going to see it through no matter what the consequences might be. The small consultation room behind the altar felt like a different world compared to the chaos they had left in the main church. Father Thomas closed the door gently and turned to face Lisa, who was standing in the corner with her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. The makeup that had been so carefully applied that morning was now streaked with tears, revealing the truth that had been hidden underneath. The bruise around her left eye was clearly visible now, a yellowish-purple mark that spoke of violence from several days ago. Father Thomas felt his heart break as he realized how much pain this young woman had been hiding. "Lisa," he said softly, keeping his distance so she wouldn't feel trapped. "You're safe here. Nobody can hurt you in this room. Can you tell me what's really going on?" For a long moment, Lisa just stood there shaking. The sound of David's angry voice could be heard through the door, demanding that the ceremony continue immediately. Each time his voice rose, Lisa flinched like she had been hit. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't understand. If I don't go through with this, he'll—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but the terror in her eyes said, "Everything." Father Thomas had counseled many people over the years, but he had rarely seen someone so completely broken by fear. He pulled out a chair and sat down, making himself less intimidating. "Lisa, I've been a priest for 20 years. I've seen many difficult situations, and I want you to know that whatever David has told you, whatever threats he's made, there are people who can help you. You don't have to face this alone." The dam finally burst. Lisa collapsed into the other chair and began sobbing uncontrollably. Between the tears and gasps for air, her story started pouring out in broken pieces. "It wasn't always like this," she managed to say. "When we first started dating, David was so charming and romantic. He would send me flowers every week and take me to expensive restaurants. All my friends said I was so lucky to find someone like him." Father Thomas listened patiently as Lisa described how gradually, almost without her noticing, David had begun to change. First, he started suggesting that her friends were jealous of their relationship and didn't want to see her happy. Then he convinced her that her family didn't really understand their love and were trying to break them up. "He made me quit my job," Lisa continued, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "He said a woman like me shouldn't have to work, that he would take care of everything. It sounded so romantic at the time. I thought I was living in a fairy tale, but the fairy tale had quickly turned into a nightmare. Once Lisa became financially dependent on David, his true personality emerged. He started checking her phone constantly, demanding to know where she was every minute of the day. He would show up at places unexpectedly, claiming he just wanted to surprise her. But Lisa knew he was checking to make sure she was where she said she would be. "He isolated me from everyone," she explained, her voice getting stronger as she talked. "Whenever I tried to spend time with friends or family, he would start a fight. He'd accuse me of not loving him enough, of choosing other people over him. It was easier to just stay home with him than deal with the arguments." The physical violence had started small. A grip on her arm that was too tight, a push that seemed accidental, a slap that he immediately apologized for with tears in his eyes. Each incident was followed by elaborate apologies, expensive gifts, and promises that it would never happen again. "But it always happened again," Lisa said quietly. "And it kept getting worse. The bruise you saw around my eye, that was 3 days ago when I suggested we should postpone the wedding because I was having second thoughts. He completely lost it." Father Thomas felt sick hearing about what this young woman had endured, but he needed to understand the full situation. "Lisa, if you know this is wrong, why were you going through with the wedding today?" The question seemed to break something inside her. Fresh tears started flowing as she explained the trap David had carefully constructed around her. He said, "If I didn't marry him today, he would kill himself and make sure everyone knew it was my fault." But that wasn't the worst part. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He said he would hurt my little sister, Katie. She's only 16, Father Thomas. She doesn't even know about any of this. David knows where she goes to school, what time she gets out, everything." The pieces were falling into place for Father Thomas. David hadn't just been controlling Lisa. He had systematically destroyed her support system and then used the people she loved most as weapons against her. "He made me practice for today," Lisa continued, her voice hollow. "He would make me stand in front of the mirror and rehearse my vows over and over until I got them right. He said if I messed up or showed any sign that I didn't want to be there would be consequences. Father Thomas understood now why Lisa had seemed so robotic during the ceremony. She had been performing a script, not expressing her true feelings. My parents spent so much money on this wedding, she said, guilt evident in her voice. Everyone traveled so far to be here. David kept reminding me how embarrassing it would be for everyone if I backed out now. He said no one would ever forgive me for ruining such a special day. The manipulation was textbook, and Father Thomas recognized every tactic. David had used love, fear, guilt, and isolation to trap Lisa so completely that she couldn't see any way out. But there is a way out, Father Thomas said firmly. Lisa, what David has done to you is not love, it's abuse. Real love doesn't involve threats or violence or fear. Real love wants you to be happy and free, not controlled and terrified. For the first time since they had entered the room, Lisa looked directly at him with something that might have been hope in her eyes. Do you really think so? Sometimes I wonder if maybe I'm just being too sensitive, or if this is normal and I just don't understand what relationships are supposed to be like. Lisa, nothing about what you've described is normal or acceptable. You deserve so much better than this. You deserve to feel safe and valued and free to make your own choices. Outside the door, David's voice was getting louder and more demanding. Father Thomas knew they were running out of time before the situation escalated further. Lisa, I'm going to ask you one more question, and I want you to answer honestly. If you could wave a magic wand right now and be anywhere in the world, completely safe from David, where would you want to be? Without hesitation, she answered, home with my family, I just want to go home. That was all Father Thomas needed to hear. Father Thomas knew he had to act quickly. Lisa's simple answer about wanting to go home with her family told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a woman who wanted to get married. This was someone desperately seeking freedom from a dangerous situation. Lisa, I want you to stay right here while I make some phone calls, he said gently but firmly. Can you do that for me? Don't open this door for anyone except me, okay? She nodded, wiping her tears with a tissue he handed her. But what about David? What about all the people out there? What am I going to tell them? You don't have to worry about any of that right now, Father Thomas assured her. The most important thing is keeping you safe. Everything else can be figured out later. He stepped into the small adjoining office and quickly dialed the local police station. His hands were slightly shaking as he explained the situation to the officer who answered. This is Father Thomas at Holy Cross Church. I have a domestic violence situation here that needs immediate attention. We have a wedding ceremony that's been stopped because the bride is in danger. While he was on the phone, the sounds from the main church were getting louder. David's voice could be heard clearly now, and he was no longer trying to maintain his charming facade. He was demanding that someone find Lisa and bring her back immediately. Where is she? David shouted. This is ridiculous. We have a wedding to finish. Some of the guests were starting to leave, clearly uncomfortable with the tension and confusion. Others were asking questions that nobody seemed able to answer. Lisa's parents were trying to get information from the remaining wedding party, but everyone was just as confused as they were. Father Thomas also called Janet Morrison, a counselor who specialized in domestic violence cases. She had worked with the church before on similar situations, and he knew she would drop everything to help. Janet, I need you at Holy Cross Church immediately. I have a young woman here who's been trapped in an abusive relationship, and I think her life might be in danger. Within 15 minutes, both the police and Janet arrived at the church. Father Thomas met them at the side entrance to avoid the chaos in the main sanctuary. Officer Rodriguez, a veteran cop who had seen plenty of domestic violence cases, listened carefully as Father Thomas explained what he had observed and what Lisa had told him. You did the right thing, Father, he said. These situations can escalate very quickly, especially when the abuser feels like they're losing control. Janet, a kind woman in her 40s with years of experience helping abuse victims, went into the consultation room to talk with Lisa, while Father Thomas and Officer Rodriguez discussed how to handle David and the situation with the wedding guests. The conversation between Janet and Lisa was gentle but direct. Janet had a way of making people feel safe and understood. and Lisa found herself opening up even more about the months of psychological and physical abuse she had endured. "You showed incredible courage today," Janet told her. "It takes tremendous strength to break free from a situation like this, especially in such a public way. But I've ruined everything," Lisa said, fresh tears starting to flow. "The wedding, all the money my parents spent, all these people who came here to celebrate with us." "Lisa, listen to me," Janet said firmly but kindly. "None of this is your fault. The only person responsible for ruining this day is David. You didn't choose to be abused. You didn't choose to be threatened and controlled. You chose to save yourself. And that's something to be proud of." Meanwhile, in the main church, the situation was getting more tense by the minute. David had gone from charming and concerned to angry and demanding. When Officer Rodriguez approached him to ask some questions, David's true nature became obvious to everyone watching. "This is all completely unnecessary," David snapped. "Lisa is just having some pre-wedding nerves. She'll be fine once we get this ceremony finished." "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down and answer a few questions for me," Officer Rodriguez said in his professional but authoritative voice. "I don't have to answer anything. Where's my wife? I want to see Lisa right now." "She's not your wife yet, sir, and she's asked to speak with a counselor privately. You're going to need to respect that." That's when David completely lost control. He started shouting about his rights, about how much money he had spent on the wedding, about how Lisa belonged to him. Several wedding guests backed away from him, finally seeing the angry, controlling man that Lisa had been dealing with in private. When David tried to push past Officer Rodriguez to get to the consultation room, the officer had no choice but to restrain him. As they put handcuffs on David, he continued screaming threats about what he would do to Lisa when he got out. "You can't hide from me forever, Lisa," he yelled as they led him toward the exit. "I know where your family lives. I know where your sister goes to school." Those threats were exactly what Officer Rodriguez needed to hear. Making threats against someone's family members was a serious criminal offense, and it gave them grounds to hold David while they investigated the domestic violence allegations. Lisa's parents, who had been watching this scene unfold in shock and confusion, finally understood what had been happening to their daughter. Her mother immediately rushed toward the consultation room, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God, we had no idea," she sobbed to Father Thomas. "How did we not see? What was happening? How could we have let this go on?" Father Thomas gently explained that abusers are often very skilled at hiding their true nature from others, especially family members. "David fooled a lot of people," he said. "What matters now is that Lisa is safe and has your support." The reunion between Lisa and her parents was emotional and healing. For the first time in months, Lisa felt like she could breathe freely. Her father held her while she cried, promising that they would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Over the next few hours, Janet helped Lisa understand her options and develop a safety plan. The police gathered evidence and began building a case against David. Most importantly, Lisa began to realize that she wasn't alone anymore. 3 months later, Lisa returned to Holy Cross Church, but this time it was just to say thank you. She looked completely different, healthier, happier, and free. She had moved back in with her family temporarily and was working with a therapist to heal from her experience. "I want to thank you for saving my life," she told Father Thomas with tears in her eyes. "I honestly don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't stepped in that day." "You saved yourself, Lisa," he replied. "I just helped open the door. You're the one who walked through it." David was facing multiple charges and was required to stay away from Lisa and her family. Lisa had started a new job and was slowly rebuilding her life on her own terms. Standing in the same church where her nightmare had almost become permanent, Lisa felt nothing but gratitude. Sometimes the most beautiful endings don't look anything like what we originally planned, and sometimes the greatest act of love is helping someone find the courage to choose freedom over fear.